don't have to sit near it. It's quite a powerful.
Is it good? Right.
So we'll begin by identifying the problems. Recently, as you know, certain groups have appeared at the tribunal and pointed out the percentage of local content. It seems quite absurd in my view that of all the civilised countries, Australia has the lowest local content quota. What are how does this situation arise? What are the main obstacles to developing a fairer quota, their own local product?
Well, I think the main obstacle to developing a fair quota is political. I mean, I think the only way that an adequate quota of Australian productions could appear on the screens would be literally by government decree. In the past, it's been cajoling and persuading the commercial managements to sort of do their bit for Australia, as it were, and and do the right thing and put on Australian productions. And it's been one of, say, cajoling, of at times of sort of wagging the finger at them, etc. But it's been very much a gentleman's agreement. The Broadcasting Tribunal, as it is now, of course, as you know, was something that came after the Broadcasting Control Board, which had no teeth whatsoever. The Whitlam government attempted to give the Broadcasting Control Board teeth, which isn't in the Act, and it brought forward the Broadcasting and Television Bill. Of course, not having the numbers in the Senate, although it was passed in the House of Representatives, it was knocked back by the Senate. They introduced it 3 times, in fact. It was knocked back 3 times by the Senate. That would have given the Broadcasting Control Board teeth to enforce Australian quotas. So basically, I think it comes back to a really political decision. Until you get a government in that is more sympathetic to the Australian performers' point of view, and not one that is naturally sympathetic to the managements, to the owners of the television stations, as is now the case, I don't think we'll get much further than we've got, peculiarly enough. At the moment, there's a bigger spate of Australian productions than ever. And they're all of a soap opera variety, or most of them of a soap opera variety, doing an enormous output, 2 hours a week, which is unequalled anywhere else in the world. Believe it or not, they would not produce 2 hours of television a week anywhere in the world. And that's what all of our soap operas literally do here now. And I'm calling soap operas the Sullivans, Cop Shop, The Prisoner, Skyways, Young Doctors, The Restless Years, etc., etc., etc. There's a lot of Australian stuff on at the moment, but it's all of the soap opera type, and naturally done very, very hurriedly and very, very quickly. And I'm pleased, because I'm in one of those soap operas, that they've been successful. But in a way, the fact that they have been successful really mitigates against certainly better quality stuff, because the management can legitimately say, well, look, we're doing 2 hours a week and blah, blah, whether you like it or not, the public like it because they're watching it. So when we come up with a new show, we want 2 hours a week of that show as well. So peculiarly enough, the thing that's worked against certainly quality productions, I think, just deviating slightly, is the success of the soap operas. So we're in a sort of a bind, and at the moment, Channel 7 could stand back and legitimately say, we are producing 4 hours a week of Australian drama at prime time. What they mean by that is 2 hours of Cop Shop and 2 hours of Skyways. Doug McClelland, in the Whitlam government, tried the point system, which was really a failure. Basically, it wasn't a bad idea. You got points for quality drama, you know what I mean? X amount of money put into, say, an hour would give you, 8 points. Whereas, a drama with less money put into it and less rehearsal time gave you less points. So he tried a point system. It didn't work because the Broadcasting Control Board had no teeth to implement it.
His position with the tribunal.
No, I mean, let's be honest. I mean, Bruce Gingell is an appointee of the government. Bruce Gingell has a background of, and he's the chairman of the tribunal. He has a background of commercial television involvement. So naturally, it stands to reason. No matter how fair he says he tries to be, he comes from that background. He's bound to be biased toward the station managements. I honestly can't see anything coming out of the tribunal at all. I'm very pessimistic, in fact. Very pessimistic. I personally see still in the short term just pressure from pressure groups, from interested bodies, children's television, etc. People who want quality Australian drama, just getting the pressure and embarrassing the stations into producing more Australian stuff.
Well, were you involved before Terry with the
Make it Australia Committee?
Yes.
Yes. I was one of the foundation members of that.
I recall a few years back public meetings.
That's right. Yeah.
Can you tell us something about them? How were they effective? What did they achieve?
I think they were very effective. The Make It Australia Committee was formed by an interested group of actors, led by people like Terry Donovan, Ted Hamilton, Gerard Kennedy, Alwyn Kurtz, myself. At that time, Australian drama was at a very low ebb. There was very little Australian stuff being done. This was prior to the Whitlam government's election. I think that was formed, I reckon, about 1969, 70. Australian drama was at a very low ebb, and really it was a group of actors bringing forward the business of make Australian productions. It was as simple as that. Make it Australia. They got an enormous amount of publicity, put an enormous amount of effort into it, and virtually did help in the long run to make the public aware of the fact that there was an enormous reservoir of talent here, with actors, writers and directors, etc. We were being swamped by imported productions that were literally being dumped on us at dumping prices, dumping rates. They could buy in those days things like Jack Webb's Dragnet, or whatever the current American show was at the time, for literally a 20th of what it cost. Whereas to produce an equivalent Australian hour of drama, what I mean, would have cost 6 times that amount of money. And yet they were comparing the two. The Australian show was being produced for peanuts in comparison, and in a quarter of the time than they could buy a big American overseas show. And in fact, that's still the case. And the only reason that we have Australian stuff at the moment is the fact that luckily the Australian public seem to prefer it. But if it came down to sheer, viewers, and viewers weren't particularly bothered about Australian stuff, we'd have 99% American and British stuff on the television screens. But luckily the Australian public is now aware and accepting Australian productions. But the Make It Australia Committee served an enormous function. Yeah, they made the public aware, I think, for the first time of the Australian profession and what it was capable of.
Do you think that programs like Against the Wind, 20 good years, and I suppose the Sullivans as well, does it represent a possible new direction of the trend among the public to acceptance of things other than what I think things are stereotyped police dramas?
You're looking at me when you say that.
Yeah.
How dare you, Barry, sit here and say that to me? No, I'm joking. Do I think that the Sullivans and Against the Wind? I think that there'll always be room for. I consider the Sullivans, a very good program. It's a family type show. Great. There's not enough of them. It is still a soap opera. Against the Wind was more of a quality production, and I'm thrilled that it rated so well. But I think your basic Australian television will always be your cops and the public like them. And we come back to the old business of ratings. And those shows rate very well. The whole of the Australian industry, as whether we like it or not, really, has been based on police shows. Homicide, Division 4, a Matlock with a 3, openers. Cop Shop is another follow-up, if you like. People like police shows. I think it's marvellous that Against the Wind and these other, big budget productions have taken off. And let's hope there's going to be more of them. But really, I see the backbone of the industry will be popular television, simply because they rate.
Well, I must say,
they rate.
I'm quite an addict of Cop Shop. I was hooked on it for a while. I don't like being hooked on any program.
No. But this is the reason, Barry. And commercial television. Let's face it, they are there to flog products. That's their main purpose: selling. And you stand or fall on your ratings. And if it rates, you're on. If the Sullivans didn't rate, it would be off next week. As good as it is, Against the Wind was a gamble that Channel 7 took. They didn't know how it would rate. Luckily, it rated very well. And let's hope that we've heard they bought another one. I don't know, Ian Jones probably told you himself. I don't know whether he's making it public, but they seem to be interested in something else, which is marvellous. But I think they'll be rarities, I really do. One of the great problems with Australia, I think, as Frank Green once said, is that we speak English. And it's so easy to pick the eyes out of, we're dumping grounds for everything that is American or British or you name it. If we spoke a runter, we'd have a thriving industry here, because people, would want to, programs in their own language, etc. But unfortunately we speak English, and we're the pickings for the giants of America and Britain.
The instant reports.
Oh gee, that's going back a bit.
I've read excerpts from
1962, would it be? That was brought down?
One particular excerpt that struck me was very pertinent, related to the fact that we have a whole generation of Australians who have grown up with television, quite alarmingly with parents. Their parents who've grown up with television, therefore less aware of the adverse consequences of some programs on it. So we're growing up with the future generation completely influenced by television. And when you consider the influx of the overseas programs, none of which accurately reflect the way of life of their own country and culture, never mind Australia's way of life and culture. It's very alarming when you think in the long-term consequential effects.
Indeed. Very alarming.
Well, I don't want this becoming out too negative, always being having problems. Can you see television playing a positive role in...
No, I'm very pessimistic. I'm sorry, I want to be optimistic, but I can't be optimistic. I'm very pessimistic about television and the influence it's having on, the younger generation. Kids are hooked on television. The figures that one continually reads, they watch more television hours than they spend at school. You know yourself as a teacher. The time kids are up at night watching television. Unfortunately, with television, kids who were born into it are just as hooked on it. In other words, they don't take it for granted. They're just as hooked on it as people, say, of my generation who saw television come in, as a new innovation. I remember the Cat's Whisker and the old crystal sets, and I've seen this enormous revolution of, radios and then television, which was undreamed of me as a kid, that you could sit in your front room and watch pictures, a man walking on the moon. I mean, that was, just fantasy land. But, one seen it happen in a matter of, really a very short time. So it's all still wondrous to a lot of people of my generation. But you think the kids who were born into it, you know, from 1956 onwards, what is it, 56, 76, 56, 66, 76, what is it? We've had this television set now for how long? Over 20 years, 23 years. So, you know, a kid who's 20 years of age has been born into it. They're just as hooked on it as the older generation. That to me is the sad thing. They don't take it for granted. They'll sit and be mesmerised by it no matter what they're watching, whether they're watching, you know, I Dream of Jeannie or, you know, getting Gertie's Garter or watching the ads. So I'm very pessimistic, yes. I think television is a very negative thing. I think it is definitely had an adverse effect on family life. People don't talk anymore, they don't converse anymore, they sit and watch their meals. Hello, my darling.
Hello, good night.
Oh, you're going to bed now, are you, darling?
Oh, can we stay up?
You can do if you want. I love you. You can stay up for another half an hour. There you are.
Oh, thank you.
I can't think of many things good that television has done. I really can't. And when you think of television, you know, of all the years you've sat and watched it, it's a very forgettable thing. You never remember much of what you saw last night, or really what you saw an hour ago. It's a soporific. You sit in front of it and it all washes over you. And you go to bed that night and you wake up in the morning and go to work and the bloke says, what did you see last night? And you find it very difficult to remember. Whereas even watching good films on television, you know, that one may have seen in the cinema, don't have the same impact. Somehow making the effort and going out to a cinema and watching it, you can remember vividly lots of your favourite films, but I bet you've seen them all in the cinema. You know, in other words, television's so convenient. You sit there, you watch people's faces when they're watching it, sort of, you know, they're dead. It's not stimulating, and I can't even see it stimulating, Barry, as an educational medium, unless it is allied with a teaching program, unless it's allied with reading and with lots of other things. But as people say, oh, it's wonderful, you should have seen that in colour, it was so educational. What was it about, you ask them 10 minutes later, and they can't frame or remember. It hasn't got a lasting impact. So I'm very pessimistic about television. I think it's here to stay. But I can't think of many good points for it. I can't really see an enormous change coming over the industry, getting onto a personal level. I think we'll go on very much as we're going. And with the success of the soapy, as long as they continue to be successful, I think we'll see more of them. When they cease to be successful, we'll have another dearth in Australian production, a bit more agitation, and then something else will happen. So, unless we get a change in the political sphere, where I'm afraid things have got to be legislated. You know, Australian content, I think the only way to do it properly is to have it legislated. If you get your licence, this is the amount of Australian content you've got to produce, and this much has got to be quality television, and that much is, you know, right, that can be your serial type thing, and, you know, I think it's got to be done in black and white. You see, there's been an enormous mess-up with the Australian television system from the word go. The way the licences were given out, the whole system of Australian television. You know, we've got really too many television stations. The city the size of Melbourne with four channels. Too many. O came on the scene. You know, first of all, 9 was given to the Herald and Weekly Times. The 7 was given to the Herald and Weekly Times. 9 was given to Frank Packen, all friends of the government at the time. And then Channel O came along, and his great attribute was that he ran an airline. What he knew about television or show business, you know, I wouldn't have a clue. Hector Crawford put in for the licence and was beaten for it by Reg Ansett. It's as ludicrous as them starting another airline and Hector Crawford, you know, tendering for it and getting the airline in front of Reg Ansett. You know, really. And the way it's all been set up, you know, and literally when Channel O came along, it meant we've still got the same size cake, you know, because this is the commercial channel's excuse the whole time. It isn't financially viable to spend that much money on. You know, we are in business after all, etc., etc., etc. So that was the argument when there were two channels. And suddenly there was another one came into the fray. So they still had the same size revenue cake from advertisers. Yet there was another slice to be got out of it by O. So this gave them more ammunition. We're making less money now because he's come into the scene. You know, these are the arguments they used as regards budgets. And a lot of them are hard to fight. You know, because there weren't any more advertisers. There wasn't any more money in the barrel. There was another mouth to be fed. That was Ansett, who spent most of his time buying overseas programs. Yet to read his submissions, which read like Hans Andersen's fairy tales, of what he was and going, if you want westerns, we'll give you Australian westerns. If you want domestic, you know, he's going to be the greatest Australian advocate since sliced bread. It was going to be incredible what Ansett was going to do. Of course, he didn't do a thing for years. And his first foray really into Australian productions was quite a good children's television show called The Magic Circle Club, which he then axed and it went to two. And then years and years later he came up with number 96. Well, he didn't, but he bought it. And that helped his ratings tremendously. Funnily enough, see, O's been a great failure as regards, it's always ran a very bad third in the commercial sphere. But peculiarly enough, all of their big winners have been Australian shows. 96, The Box. At the moment, The Prisoner. So, you know, this is one of the ironies of Ansett. He spent loads of money buying mostly American tripe. Charlie's Angels and Hawaii 5-0 and all this sort of stuff, you know, because that's where he buys all of his aircraft from. And I'm sure there's some deal there somewhere. You know, everything comes from America, even his son. You know, funnily enough though, his peaks have been with Australian shows. Quite ironic, really. So, if I can just recap on that. So having messed up the system to begin with and given licences to friends of the government, because that's literally how it was done, I had to take a very strong government to sort of change the system. Because believe it or not, Mr. Joe Blow from Moorabbin, Ascot Vale, you know, you interfered with that system now. It'd be like interfering with the crown jewels. It would take a very strong government to drop a channel, you know, and sort of say, right, now we've eliminated one channel which gives you more revenue, therefore we want better quality, we want more Australia, you know what I mean, between the two of you. It'd take honestly, there'd be an assassination on. Yeah. So I see us locked into a system that's been sort of, you know, a disaster from the word go. Really just trying to make the best of it.
There is that feeling that public support for more
local shows. There is. Most definitely. Most definitely.
That's really the most positive thing.
It is. It's very, very true, because if you look at the top rating programs, they are all Australian. So that is certainly something that's happened. Because in my lifetime, I can, you know, the early days of television now, Australian programs were, you know, considered death as regards ratings. But Australians now certainly, they'd rather sit and watch, if you want a cop show, they'd rather sit and watch people running around, you know, the streets of St Kilda or Richmond or somewhere, than they would running around the streets of Los Angeles or, you know, Pimlico, which is good. We come back to the old self-identification thing, don't we? That's right. That's right. And the Sullivans, they'd rather sit and watch a family in Camberwell than, you know, the family in Boston. So they're the encouraging things. We're certainly much more aware, I think, of being Australian. Don't you reckon?
I think
we're not embarrassed about it anymore. I think the great Australian thing was this enormous inferiority complex. I can remember when people like Chips Rafferty, who was a very good Australian type. You would be too young to remember Chips Rafferty.
Oh,
wouldn't
no,
you?
I remember.
Well, you remember Chips Rafferty then. He was a good Australian type. You know, the tall, thin. People were embarrassed in this country by Chips Rafferty. They wouldn't be now. But we don't talk like that. We don't behave like that. You know what I mean? They sort of thought they were sort of little bits of England or somewhere. You know what I mean? It was quite strange. They were embarrassed by their accent. They were embarrassed by, you know, all sorts of things that were identifiably Australian. And that's, you know, vivid within my memory. But luckily all that has now changed.
Well, I know as a teacher, to a large degree, it gets back to the education system, which until recently has been, well, it's really perpetuated the type of national inferiority complex.
Absolutely.
You can study Greek or American or different history of monarch, British royalty very easily. When it comes to good textbooks and teaching aids on Australian history, until recently they were few and far
That's
between.
right. That's right.
It's only now that there's an upsurge of material looking at Australia.
Absolutely.
Educating kids in things that are relevant to them as Australians.
And that was one of the nice things, I think, about Against the Wind, the fact that they used a bit of Australian history, you know, I think made it very relevant to people that wouldn't normally sit and watch an historic reenactment, you know. The ordinary person sitting in suburbia there who found it very interesting and, you know, educational, if you like, along with a good story, and they stuck with it, which that's very encouraging. Very encouraging.
Look at that tape. Yep, plenty of it. Well, regarding the...
I'm sorry to be so pessimistic.
well, I mean, you're saying that
all over the place.
you're calling it as it is. I mean, that's the... you're the expert on it because you're so intrinsically involved. I know you're painting a rosy picture if one doesn't exist, but what I meant by not being too negative, obviously when you say it's a political problem to degree, requiring a legislative solution, you must have something specific in mind, even if it's impractical in the immediate sense. You know, in the magazine we'd like to be able to say, well, this is the problem, you know, here's what can be done about it. Otherwise you have people saying, oh well, it's hopeless, let's give in and watch Charlie's Angels instead of Against the Wind. You know, they don't want to create a feeling of despair about the whole problem.
No, I'm not despair, but shall we say, we are faced with a fait accompli, really. I mean, we're faced with a situation that I cannot really see being altered, and that's the structure of the television channels. Mr. Gingell is talking vaguely about, oh, well, if they don't pull themselves up, we may think about, you know, reneging on their licence next time. I say that's a heap of... The lady present, I won't use the word. That's a heap of, to use an old Cockney expression, a heap of cobblers. They would no more revoke a licence than fly to the moon. So I can't, and that to me is the only way to do it. See, in Britain they did it. They revoked Harlech's licence. Britain's much stricter. You don't comply to the letter of your charter that you were given the licence for on public airwaves. Right, your licence is removed. They'd never do that here. So in that respect, I think I'm being a realist, because I really can't see that situation being altered. But as regards Australian awareness and Australian productions and spending more money, you know, promoting the nationalist without wanting to be, you know, tub thumping, I think really it's got to be legislated. When a licence is granted, it's only granted on these terms, and it's reviewed every 12 months, and if at the end of that 12 months, like they do in Britain, you have not complied with the letter of your licence, it's revoked. And we call tenders for someone else to take it. You know, that to me is the only way to run it. But that will have to come through, as I say, legislation.
But that's being more specific. That's the type of thing we want to advocate through them.
Well, if you can grab something out of that,
what I mean
push
is
that.
there
Yeah.
are practical solutions, even though they may, a tremendous obstacle hasn't been overcome, but there are things that can be done, given, let's say, a change in government or more public pressure or whatever.
It'll have to be a change in both houses. because they did try before 3 times, but not having the numbers in the Senate, the bill was beaten. You know, otherwise, I can just sort of see it's drifting on really as we've gone on. In fact, certainly with the tribunals as constituted at the moment, with Bruce Ginger or not, as head, you know. There'll be no change.
Fine. Some background information.
Background. Born 1930 in the suburb of Richmond in Victoria. Left school at 14. Went to work at the Tivoli Theatre, Melbourne, as a wardrobe boy, painting the girls' shoes. Then decided I'd like to go on the stage. No background whatsoever in the business. My father was a boilermaker, and because I couldn't pass my merit, as you had to pass in those days, to go to technical school. What could a boy from Richmond who can't pass his merit do, other than an unskilled job? So that was really, you know, started to become interested in the theatre. I don't know what made me interested in the theatre. I went to see a live show. In fact, the curtain went up and I was entranced by the glamour of it all. And really I was bitten by the bug, I suppose. I wanted to be involved in it in some way, and really I started backstage. And then decided I'd like to go, as we had to do in those days, really to make a living, you had to go abroad. And I went to England and spent the next 14 years there. Doing all sorts of things, rep and, you know, in fact, for 6 years at that time I was in weekly rep in Britain, which is a new play every week.
Yeah, what's rep?
Repertory. Every city in those days in Britain had its own professional repertory company. Every city of any size whatsoever. There were hundreds of them, all over the country. It was a marvellous training ground. And I did years of that, and tours and television and whatnot. Met and married my wife, who was also an actress. We then wanted to start a family. What better place than to come home and do it. Came back to Australia in the early 60s and have been the luckiest actor in Australia since coming back home. All those tough years in Britain, you see, and suddenly my Dame fortune smiled upon me when I came home again. And I have not been out of work, so I'm a bad advert for Australian actors who can't get work. I've not been out of work since 1962, which must be something of a record. And I've not left Melbourne. I've never worked outside of Melbourne. I've done 6 years at Dickie and John's Music Hall. I've done lots of plays on the stage. I've done lots of television series. Well, a lot of variety shows for Channel 7. We did 3 years of Time for Terry, a woman's afternoon show on television. All things like, you know, the Barry Creighton show, the Apple Pie show, the Tommy Hanlon show. I even compared IMT once. Then I've done, 10 years in Bellbird, which was the first of the Australian soapies. I did 2 years in one of the original Crawford shows called Consider Your Verdict.
Oh, yeah.
Consider your verdict. I was the prosecuting counsellor in that for 2 years. I've been so lucky, it's been incredible. I've gone literally from one job to another. And now 2 years in Cop Shop. Finish up the Hector Crawford Cop. I mean, what more does life hold for?
What about the awards, Terry?
I have never won an award in my life. I've never won an award in my life. The only, reward I've had has been a regular pay packet. So, virtually, I got a long service award, I think we call it for Bellbird, from the Australian Institute of Television or some such thing. But I've never won an award, frankly. Nope. Never even been mentioned in dispatches. But
What is
luckily,
the future holds.
you see, when you're earning a living as an actor, unfortunately you can't eat awards. And if I won an award, I might start to think my luck has run out. Because Australian show business is littered with people who have won awards and never worked again. So in that respect, my greatest reward has been the fact that I've been able to feed my wife and children, which, you know, has been something that a good many wonderful Australian actors have not had the opportunity of doing. You know? I think Stanley Holloway was asked at the age of 86 when he was out here originally to do The Pleasure of His Company. He was still working at 86. This was last year, Stanley Holloway, and giving the best performance in the show. What do you put down as your success? You know, 86 years of age, and still working, wonderful. And he said, what do I put down, the secret to my success? He said, it boils down to this, like any actor, 30% talent and 70% luck. So that's possibly my recipe. I've been very lucky. And what do I hope to do in the future? Keep working. You know, I'm just happy to work. One day possibly like to direct something. But, you know, I've been very lucky.
Thanks very much.
God has been good.
That's what he has been. Let's hope he stays that way, hey?
You know, if you sat down and worried about yourself,